when you're in a conversation with a woman, it becomes very easy to get caught up in your own thoughts in your head and think, what's the perfect thing to say? What do I do here? And you wind up running out of things to say over, analysis of paralysis and all that type of stuff. So what I want to do for you here in this video is I want to give you 4 conversation mindsets, 4 reminders, things to have and remember in your mind so that you can carry a conversation more easily and more effectively. Not necessarily just the perfect thing to say, but a principle in general to remember during the conversation so that you can keep the conversation fun, interesting, relevant, and have it flow a lot easier without overanalyzing and overthinking what you're going to say next. So the first mindset and the first thing to remember when you're in a conversation with a woman is that you want to keep it fun. And by keeping it fun, you really, the issue here is you don't want to get so deep into that interview mode and that just factual exchange of information. Okay, I'm from here, I went to this school, I do this, I did that, and I think this about that and this about that. You want to keep it fun, you want to keep it light, you want to keep it playful, okay? You want to throw in a little humor, okay? The easiest way to do this is to answer a question with something humorous. Okay, so someone says, so what do you do in town? They go, I'm actually a professional scooter racer. It only gets up to about, it's really tricky because they only get up to about 15 or 16 miles per hour, but that means it's all technique from there. It's all about how you cut the corners, and it's all about focus and discipline, avoiding rocks, different things like that. So it's actually a really intricate thing. And something like that, just a little joke, a little humor, something to kind of break up the conversation a bit, to keep things fun, to keep things interesting, will be super, super effective, and something just to remember, because you'll get caught up in a conversation that gets so stale and so boring. And one thing my buddy used to say back in the day is that, you'll start a conversation, a woman will now ask you questions, and you'll answer, she'll answer, and it'll get really boring, and she'll blame it on you. Okay, it's your job to make the conversation fun and interesting. Now, obviously, you need a dance partner too, so they have to participate as well. But you can control only what you can control. And with that being said, you want to control the conversation by bringing in some fun, bringing in some humor, making some jokes about things that are going on, and even bringing up things that you find funny as well too. Okay, so bringing fun into the conversation is going to bring a good emotion and going to be very, very helpful for you. Now, right after fun, another thing that's super important is to be interesting. Okay, and another quote from my old good buddy was, if you say one interesting thing, they'll be like, oh, that's interesting, but if you say a few interesting things, they'll say, you're interesting, okay? And by interesting, I mean things that are a little unconventional, okay? It's okay to have that normal get to know you conversation, the where you're from, what do you do, what brought you to town, all that type of stuff. That's okay, that's going to come up, but you want to add in some more interesting things, okay? Don't just say that I'm from the East Coast. Paint the picture of the East Coast. Paint the picture of where you're from. Paint the story about how you got here, okay? For example, me and my good buddy who I go out with, when they say, how do you meet? I don't just say, oh, we met through mutual friends. I tell this cool story about how we met. And people always say, oh, I love that story. That was so interesting, right? Because, I just found that he was a certain type of person that I wanted to align with. And I wound up, approaching him when we were out. And then we wound up spending some time together and finding that we had so many things in common. We now have this beautiful relationship, right? So I tell this interesting story, right? You can tell an interesting story about why you moved to the city that you live in. You could tell a very interesting story about how you got into the work that you're into. You can tell a very interesting story about your friend or how you guys became friends. You want to take some time, even before you have these conversations, and write down some of these stories that are going to come up over and over again. Write down some facts and some details that you may want to share, some interesting things that you want to display about yourself. Have these interesting things so that you become an interesting person, all right? And then not only that, but you have to act interested in what you're talking about as well. You can talk about, I could talk about the art I have on my wall, or I could talk about music and stuff like that I like, but I have to talk about it in a way that I'm passionate and interested in it. And those emotions will carry over and be reflected by the other person that you're in the conversation with. So be interested in what you're talking about. Talk about things in an interesting way. And if you don't think your life is very interesting, I'm going to be honest with you. Go do some interesting things, okay? And it doesn't have to be anything complicated. You could go downtown and take some pictures of the architecture, and you could talk about it in a way that's super interesting. You could take a little day trip, an hour outside of the city, and find a super cool and interesting town that you can now tell somebody to do. Do something a little unconventional. Get off the Netflix and get off the Instagram, and go do something that's a little outside the box and interesting that you can now tell people about in your conversations. Now, the third thing I actually included in my last one, I didn't realize it until I'm looking at my notes now, was to be interested. Okay, actually, no, this is different. So, like I said, be interested in the things you're talking about, but this one, actually, the third thing is separate, actually, is being interested in the other person. Okay, this is probably the most important of all the things that I'm going to share here in this video, is that you need to act genuinely interested in the other person. Not even act, you need to be genuinely interested in the other person. And you have to be curious about getting to know them. The issue is, especially when it comes to conversing with a woman or a dating type of scenario, is we come into these situations and we're like, okay, does this person check off the boxes that I'm looking for? Are they attractive? And then we worry about, even more so, are they attracted to me? Am I making a good impression? How can I say or do something so that they become more attracted to me? And we think about that, and we're so focused on that, where we're so worried about what we're saying next versus actually getting to know the person. Forget your goals, forget your agenda, put all that bullshit to the side. Forget if this person's right for you or where this conversation is going to go. Put all that shit to the side and say, let me get to know this person. Let me be interested in this person. Tell me about you. I'm curious. What's life like? Like I was thinking of a good question to get to know some people, because I was traveling a little bit last week, and some people lived in different places. A good question to ask is, what's life like in blah, 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 the city that you live in? What's life like? What do you usually do during the week? What do you do on the weekends? What do you do for fun? What are you into? What type of stuff, what type of creative stuff are you into? Get to know somebody. Be interested, be curious, genuinely interested, and be curious in finding out who this person is and painting a picture of who they are. People love talking about themselves, okay? And people will feel more attracted to you by sharing information about themselves. So this is the most key of all these things, is to act interested in the other person, right? And now you could throw the little fun in and play a little hard to get and do that little, do the flirting stuff, and someone says something and you call them a dork or a wizard or a nerd or something like that, and you could throw all that fun stuff in there. But and you could play a little hard to get to, and be a little mysterious and break things up and be fun and get someone more interested in you by maybe holding back a little information. Oh, we'll talk about that later. Or, if you give me $20, I'll tell you that story or something like that. Just like a little joking thing. So you can incorporate that fun in there. But in general, probably the best, heaviest amount of your conversation should be invested in actually being curious and getting to know the other person. Like they said, that quote in Pulp Fiction, so many times people feel like they're just talking and listening and waiting for their turn to speak, right? Instead of actually listening to the other person. So you don't want to sit there and just wait for your turn to speak. You want to listen and be genuinely curious. And that goes into the last part. And I remember sharing some audio of me out talking to women with some students of mine years ago, and we were breaking it down. And one of them said the biggest takeaway they got was that I left some silence in the conversation, okay? A lot of guys are so afraid of an awkward silence or a silence, right? So you're asking someone a question, they're telling you something, you're listening. You're not listening so that when they're done, you can now say, oh, I did that too, or this and that. And it's okay to relate. That's all fine stuff to do. But you want to listen and keep it open. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a conversation with someone, they're telling me something, and I want to say, oh, I did that too, or relate. And then I say, back up, relax, let them go. Let them go. Let them tell you more stuff. Let them go. Hey, they're actually doing more of the work too, which is totally fine, right? So it's a little lazy as well too. Save some of your energy. But so many times I want to jut in and say, oh, I know that, or I did that too. And I want to relate so bad, but I just sit back and I let them talk. So I know ultimately that person is going to be more attracted to me, and I'm going to get a better picture of them by them telling me stuff. Sometimes I'm like, why should I repeat something that I already know? I'm not going to learn anything from that, right? I'm not going to build more of a connection by me just repeating something that I already know. Let me listen to what they're saying. I probably learn something new. I could learn more about them. And I definitely build more of a connection that way. So I let silence go in there. And a lot of times too, if you leave silence in your interactions and you don't jump to fill it, the other person will often do it. So many times there's silence and I let it be. Now the girl will ask you ask you a question. The girl will continue the conversation with the story and she will invest more in the interaction. And as we know, when you invest more in the interaction, you become more attracted to the other person, okay? I always tell guys when they get a phone number and it's like, oh, okay, the girl didn't write me back. I always say, what do you remember about that girl? What did she tell you about herself? Did she invest in the interaction? And if they can't remember anything, I'm like, well, there you go. That's why she didn't write you back, because she didn't invest or put any effort into this conversation. Now, the only caveat and the only thing to remember about this is that when you first approach a woman, when it's a cold approach and you just met them, you may have to provide some more conversation in the beginning. I totally get that. And you'll have to do that because it may take a little bit for them to get comfortable. So you start talking, you ask the questions first, you answer your own questions, you give value, you give information, but eventually, once the other person starts to warm up, let them take over the conversation more and get interested in getting to know them as a person. I'm telling you, you do these 4 things and remember these, you won't even really need to have anything specific prepared to talk about. Just knowing and practicing these 4 things are great mindsets to keep in the back of your mind always when you're in a conversation, to build more attraction, to have the conversation flow better, and to have a genuine connection with the other person. So let me know what you thought about this video. If you have any questions about this, add them to the comments below and let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover here on your channel. Here on my channel, your channel as well too. And when you're ready, I'll have the next video queued up for you over here.